Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 75.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers and enthusiasts who are looking to take their games to new heights. Dedicated to custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to bringing you useful information on custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice techniques to take your game to new heights. It's about 8 a.m. on Monday morning as I finish publishing this podcast interview. Next week at this time, I'll probably already be in my truck traveling to attend the David Orr Flat Stick Putting Certification class being held at Campbell University in Buies Creek, North Carolina. It's about a 7-hour drive for me. I learned about this class about 2 years ago and wanted to go then, but the stars just didn't line up for me in terms of doing that, but they did this year, so I'm off next week. Really looking forward to learning more from David and being able to share his putting improvement knowledge with you. But for now, enjoy this great return interview with Jeff Sheets from Jeff Sheets Golf. And Jeff is going to talk with us today about a lot of interesting details related to golf club iron head design. Enjoy this interview. Hello, this is Tony Wright again with the Golf Improvement Podcast. And again, we're going to speak with Jeff Sheets from Jeff Sheets Golf. A little over a month ago, Jeff did a very popular interview with me on driver head design. And at the end of it, we said, hey, let's come back sometime and talk about irons and maybe wedges. And so here we are. I'm really excited to get to do this with you, Jeff. So thanks again for taking the time to share some of your knowledge and things that you do in terms of designing irons and wedges.
My pleasure, Tony. Glad to be back with you again.
Yeah, and I'm making sure everything is working and we're recording and all that good stuff. But, we were going to touch base with each other a little bit at the show, but I thought it'd be kind of a fun question to ask at the start. We were both at the PGA show, and, when I saw you, you were having a lot of different kind of meetings with people. I'm assuming you had some sort of business meetings and trying to line up some new work and, maybe comment a little bit about how the show was for you in terms of what things went on there for you.
Well, that was maybe, I've lost track, I think like my 25th PGA show to attend.
Huh.
And as always, it's a very hectic week. The objective of the show for me personally is to get face-to-face with both suppliers and clients and go through whatever programs are underway or about to get underway or are going smoothly and just, touching base so that we know everything will continue to run smoothly. But you have all the suppliers from overseas that are in attendance. And again, the customer base of people that I work with are all there in attendance. And when we can all get face to face, you just get so much more done so much quicker.
Yeah. I will mention something, too. I hadn't thought about doing this, but, one of the suggestions from the last podcast was this driver from Nuth Golf. I'm actually doing some testing with it. So far, so good. I'm pretty impressed with how it performs. It's not going out of my bag yet.
Great. Well, that was all about manipulating center of gravity, and they're pushing the envelope in regards to what's going on with the face and the USGA regulations for CT.
Yeah.
That is a forward-thinking product there.
Yeah. Well, but today we're going to talk about irons. So let's start a little bit on some of the basics. Some folks know some of this, but I think it's good to start. Some of the different types, for examples, of iron head designs, blade, muscle backs, and talk a little bit about these, from your standpoint and how you see them typically performing or who uses them and things like that.
Well,
it's a pretty wide open question.
Yeah. Categorically, and anybody listening to this podcast is probably well aware of the different categories of irons. Going from a player's blade onto that's probably, what's been deemed the least forgiving of the iron designs out there, which could be a muscle back, or it doesn't have to be a muscle back. Muscle back is just a type of blade. Onward to the next forgiveness level that we'll step up to would be a player's cavity back, which, interestingly enough, when you go through the golf magazines these days, they take all these players' cavity backs, and those are what are now constituted as blades. And
I never thought about that. That's interesting, right?
Because you go through the blade categories in a lot of the magazines, like these are all cavity backs, but they're really a cavity back intended for a good ball striker who's not looking for game improvement. They're looking for some forgiveness, and there's a difference between game improvement and forgiveness when you look at iron design or any clubhead design. And then moving on to a more game forgiving type of iron, which would be a cavity back, but compared to the players, it's going to be a little bit more oversized and more than likely a little bit more offset, possibly thicker top lines and soles, larger cavity, and there's so many iterations of that kind of extend from there to the super game forgiveness style of iron, which is going to be a very chunky sole, deep undercut in the cavity, ample offset. Top line can vary. There's a couple different approaches to that top line element there, because if it looks nice and thick, to a lot of people, that equates to stability and forgiveness. But at the same time, it takes material to make it thick. And when you make it very thin, people think more of a blade then, and less material is required, but to some people it's not as confidence instilling. So categorically, you have to take a philosophical approach. What are you going to do with an iron design as you're dealing with all the visual elements that become part of that iron?
Yeah, and I'm sure you're like I am. If I'm doing an iron fitting, it would be almost never will somebody end up with something that they don't like the looks of. Even if the performance might be better, some people just can't stand the looks of certain kind of top lines and different things like that. The optics are very important, not just from a likability standpoint, but as far as a trustworthy and confidence standpoint. Some things that you might not think you would want to see in a club, you might find out works really well when you put that product in your hand, and vice versa. Yeah, and then sometimes too, I see people that because an iron head is small, they can hit it better just because of their personal, abilities or whatever. Sometimes it helps them to focus, right? So you can't always know from the standpoint of, size and all that kind of stuff what's really going to work for somebody. At least that's been my experience. And you really need to undergo fittings. I've been working as a fitter ever since the late 80s when I was working out on the PGA Tour and the equipment trailers. And all through the years, I've been somewhat swept up into, the latest technology, the latest design. And I've done something the past few months that I hadn't done in over 20 years. I went from a cavity back iron to playing a forged blade. And I didn't think I could go back to a forged blade, but I was in the process of developing a product for a client, and we're working on the fitting system with 70-some interchangeable shafts, and in messing around with the fitting system and the TrackMan, found out that I was hitting the forged blades longer and straighter than my own cavity back irons. And I realized I had gained a shot back that I thought I had lost from my arsenal. And that's a nice boring shot into the wind. Yeah. With the blade, it came back naturally, but
I'm to the point I don't play enough golf regularly anymore to where I practice enough and can manipulate that with my cavity backs. And it's like, okay, that's gone. But so you've got to spend the time to actually hit various products and see what they do for you. Just not saying, hey, I'm automatically a game forgiveness category type golfer, and therefore I need an iron that has certain features in it. You're going to find that the design of irons can really be pretty interesting when you kind of open your mind and really test everything that's out there.
Yeah. Well, the next sort of topic is an interesting one to me, cast and forge. And I'm sure there's still a lot of people that say, well, if it's cast head, you can't bend it. And if it's cast head, maybe it's going to go further because it's cast and it's harder and, different things like that. And all that stuff is really up in the air in terms of misconceptions in my view right now. I mean, I love to hear your thoughts on, cast and forge heads and, what people really ought to understand about them.
Well, the two different manufacturing methods have both been around for forever.
Yeah.
Investment, lost wax casting goes back a few thousand years. So does forging. And when it relates to golf equipment, we've got the majority of the heads on the market are cast. They're investment cast out of either a 431 stainless steel, 17.4, which is a harder stainless steel, or it could be a very soft 304 stainless steel, or an 8620 carbon steel. The quality of a casting versus a forging does not really suffer until you start kind of looking at the metallurgy and you realize that porosity can be an inherent byproduct in an investment cast club head. Porosity are little pinholes.
Yeah, little air, kind of almost like air holes in a way, right?
Microscopic sometimes. With all the quality of the foundries that are producing golf club heads these days, porosity is not really an issue, except maybe on early castings when you're doing your first engineering samples and you're trying to get your gates figured out. Does this head need one gate, two gates, in the heel and the sole for the toe?
Now gates. That's a term I don't know that I heard before, so I'm going to stop you. Tell me what that means.
When you cast a golf club, an iron, what comes out of the mold is wax.
Yeah.
And so you have a wax part that comes out of the mold. All these wax parts are then adhered to what's called a tree.
Okay. And
the tree is really the highway or the vehicle that allows the material the steel to flow into the casting. So what happens is we take these waxes, we build this tree of club heads. The trunk of the tree is wax. The club heads themselves are wax. And somewhere on the club head is going to be a connecting spot between that club head and the tree.
Okay.
And then that entire tree, wax tree of club heads, gets dipped in a slurry. It's basically ceramic, layers of ceramic that are piled up over the course of many days, cured, and then it goes into an oven, and that ceramic is hardened extremely, to form a shell, and the wax melts out of it, and now you have this void on the inside, this void of what was the tree. Well, this is where the molten steel is poured into to allow the metal to cast the heads.
Yeah.
And then the ceramic is chipped away, and the club heads are all sawed off of the tree, wherever that gate is. And that gate is the connecting point between the club head and the tree.
Ah, okay.
And to get very good material flow, which all the good casting houses do these days, they strategically put one or two gates per club head to connect it to the tree, so that molten steel, once it starts flowing into that ceramic housing, the material moves easily and it doesn't leave voids, thus porosity.
That's
I don't know if you want to get
about as deep
I
as
didn't know if you want to get that far off base.
Well, like you said, you could talk for hours about all this stuff. So,
yeah.
So any other specific, like I said earlier, I don't think there's things that happen. A cast head can necessarily be one that's going to have for example, higher COR than a forged head and things like that. I mean, that's true, isn't it? That's a whole. Some of that stuff is
really.
Kind of,
yeah, that boils down to face construction.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do a solid cast head versus a forged head, your coefficient of restitution of the materials is not really going to vary all that greatly, whether it's a casting or forging. But we do have means to manipulate that COR by, for instance, forging or casting an iron body and then welding on a miraging steel face that will be very thin and has spring-like qualities to it that stainless steel does not have.
Yeah.
Then you can get the COR or CT up faster or higher by using an alternative face material.
Well, that really kind of segues into the next question that I told you I was going to ask too, because sort of the rage right now is high COR heads. I mean, anybody that is making something that they're saying is high performance is probably at least talking about that term, which is basically the springiness. Are most of the heads that are that way? Do they have the face that's sort of, I don't know if it's the right word, inserted then or put in just so they can really control the properties of thicknesses across that face, or how are basically get more simple? So how are those heads made?
Yeah, the higher end products will use a spring steel or high strength steel, also known as a miraging steel.
Mm-hmm.
And the miraging steel, being a spring steel, a lot of consumers don't really get it. They don't understand what it really is. But if you're to, you see a 18-wheeler headed down the highway, and he's got this big trailer that can hold a lot of weight on it that he's towing, and you can see underneath the trailer the wheels, and you see the springs under there. And as that thing goes bouncing across the road, those springs help soften the ride. Those springs go through a particular heat treatment process to become spring steel. And so if you're to take a regular 431, 17.4, 304 stainless steel, and you're to cast that to produce springs, and you try to do the same thing that tractor trailer's doing, as soon as you put that weight on there, the whole thing compresses and it never bounces back up.
Yeah.
The spring steel always returns back to its fabricated position. And so as we look at that type of material technology and we bring it over to a golf club, you got to look at the way that just a plain stainless steel cast face would be on an iron or wood versus a spring steel face that wants to return back to its fabricated position. So after the ball's compressed against faces that are both steel, but they've both been treated differently, the spring steel face is going to rebound faster, thereby imparting faster ball speed, and then that's where we pick up this distance that we haven't seen in irons for previous decades.
Yeah. And some people are also doing things where they're sort of varying sort of the springiness across the face too, to try to get more forgiveness, aren't they? Or at least that's some of the things.
Yeah, well, you've got manufacturers doing the 360-degree undercut face design, which is really more like a metalwood type of face that gives you the full area of the face to have some sort of trampoline effect. You've got the slots that have been incorporated into the sole and out into the toe, which in essence removes support structure and allows that face to flex more. The more slots you got, the more area that you've been able to spread out that trampoline-like effect. And so whether it's done with materials or done with architecture, manufacturers in general are trying to get the greatest COR out of the faces they can. There's still, as a designer, there's some argument to the pursuit of that, because as your lofts increase, you go from a low lofted club, which has a striking impact to the ball, versus a high lofted club that has a steep angle of attack and high loft on the club itself, and thereby more of a glancing impact to the ball as opposed to direct.
Yeah.
The more that the loft increases, the less that the higher COR or CT really benefits the golfer.
Okay.
And so if you're going to be designing this into equipment, designing it in lower lofted irons is really the efficient way to do it, because as your lofts increase and your swing style becomes, greater angle of attack, those variables kind of just wipe away all the engineering that you might put into a high strength miraging steel high COR face design.
Yeah, so it may not be necessary in the higher lofts from a performance standpoint to do that. Now, this is when you were talking, it's one thing, bringing back to our other podcast, when you talked, you said, well, designers pretty much have known for a long time how to make the highest performance drivers and what to do, rearward CG and things. Is that the same? Would you say the same kind of statement in terms of irons, or, has there been a lot of, sort of new? Have there been new things down the road that maybe you hadn't anticipated 5 or 10 years ago? Understand what my question is?
Yes, I understand your question, Tony, and there's a lot more variety of performance that you can get through irons per individuals. Because, when you're fitting someone to a driver, you've got one tool there. When you're fitting someone to a set of irons, you got anywhere from a half dozen to many more tools that all react differently. They have different lengths, they have different weights, they have different bounces on the soles and different lofts, and so you have to really find a product in an iron design that fits throughout the set, not just the 9-iron and pitching wedge really work for that individual, but whatever the lowest lofted iron all the way through the highest lofted are going to provide benefit to them. Yeah. And those benefits can vary greatly. For one individual, it might be really more about club head weight or total club weight. To someone else, it might mean a lot more offset in order to get the ball airborne, or to someone else, it's the critical part might really be the bounce on the soles through a set of irons. And so while the shaft's an important element, all the other aspects of the fitting are important. There could be individual traits of various iron designs that can benefit one individual more than another. Not to say that one iron design is better than another, but we've got a lot more variables to try and fit to with a set of irons versus what we were doing with the driver. We know to get high launch, low spin, we want a low rearward CG, and that's going to benefit pretty much everybody.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, the next question I was going to pose was going to talk about some other things about, head designs like top line, sole width, but, maybe we'll confine this discussion to a little bit about, either CG or center of percussion or whatever you want to call it. Will all irons have the sort of same type of location where the CG is, or center of gravity, or where the sort of sweet spot is, or what's the rationale for varying that if it is varied in irons in terms of its location on the face?
The CG location on irons while manufacturers today are trying to keep them in the center of the face, or maybe just a little heelward for blades and better players, the CG location can vary quite a bit between models from same manufacturers and then between different manufacturers. The design intent, for instance, for super game improvement clubs is usually to get the center of gravity as low as possible, get the ball airborne as easily as possible, and to get the CG as deep as possible, which means you're going to put more offset into the hosel, you're going to have a deeper undercut sole, or deeper undercut cavity with a wide sole, and you're going to try to put the center of gravity in a position to help get the ball launched high and for the club to be also more stable, higher moment of inertia. All those factors are very wood-like, low rearward CG.
Yeah.
Whereas on, let's say we're looking at a player's cavity back, which some people is a blade, but a true bona fide cavity back, you can find CG locations vary greatly between different models from different manufacturers. Some with a much higher CG, trying to what they want to do is provide some forgiveness on off-center hits, but they still want to have a CG that might be very similar to a blade, and they might not want it to be particularly low. You might have another player's cavity back that has a low CG and is intended to help that good ball striker who needs just a little bit more help getting the ball launched a little bit higher. And so there are things that will be done to manipulate the amount of offset, which also in turn manipulates where the center of gravity is on one plane. But as we go across the board, there isn't really a trend of all manufacturers trying to find that holy grail of CG locations for irons, because there are so many different types of golfers out there that have so many different types of needs, and iron variety is a really good means to fill those needs. Yeah,
to have 5 or 6 options for somebody within a manufacturer. Interesting.
Yes.
Well, this is a lot deeper today than I think we talked the last time. I mean, there's different levels of depth, but there's a lot more about irons, right? It's interesting. Talk about, if you would, one of your more recent, maybe iron designs, and sort of take us a little bit soup to nuts. Something that you really liked. Give us an example of something.
Probably one of the more recent ones I've worked on is it's a unique product that I did with a very unique individual. It was from a individual came to me who's not in the golf industry and wanted to design a set of irons. And he had done this many years ago. It was a bucket list item because he was awaiting a heart transplant. Didn't know if he would be able to get the project done before he got the heart transplant or if it would ever materialize. And so this was a work of passion.
Huh.
And over the years, he came to me originally wanting a single-length set. And while I have worked on single-length sets for other clients, the more we got into it, the more he realized there's nothing I can really patent regarding protection on a single-length set.
Yeah.
And he really liked the concept of it, even though he had never been a single-length set player. But after a lot of testing, a lot of player testing, a lot of robotic testing, a lot of insightful thinking, we arrived at a 3-length set.
Yeah, I've heard some people talk about that some now too. That's right.
Long irons at 38.5 inches, mid irons at 37 inches, and short irons at 35.5 inches. And essentially, it's really a hybrid of what's occurring with the popularity of the single-length sets and what's going on with the traditional, half-inch increment length sets. And we've seen benefits to some individuals single lengths. We've see no benefits with others. However, as we got into the 3-length set process, it was quite a bit of a learning experience, even on my part, because as we looked at loft increments and expected distances, there was no mathematical formula. It all had to be done first by Golf Laboratories on the robots, and then by focus group testing with numerous options set up so that we could actually come up with a matrix on, okay, this is how much the lofts are going to change in between each club, which within each length category. And then the real challenging question is you go from 35.5 inches up to 37 inches, what those loft differentials are going to turn out to be throughout the set, because you want to hit everything consistently 10 to 12 yards between each club. And so it became a challenge in set specifications, but the head design itself went through numerous iterations where we have an identical CG location throughout the entire set, which is not usually seen.
Yeah.
And so within this product, we've got a moment of inertia matched, long irons that are also frequency matched, that are also identical in weight, in lie, and length, and everything except the loft. And then we've replicated those same consistencies again with the mid irons, and then again with the wedges. And so whenever I work on an iron set, there's a lot of givens, and I've done hundreds of iron sets. There were no givens through this project. It really took a lot of brain power.
Yeah, so it was fun. So he's happy with the final gyration of everything, I'm guessing, right?
Oh, yes. He's very meticulous, and not only did these irons get developed to very meticulous means by design, but also he's paying for the tightest tolerances in the golf industry, as far as the manufacturing goes.
Yeah,
and all the OEM tolerances essentially he's cut in half, and those have become the tolerances for his product, which is called Equus.
Equus? It's
EQUS.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Very fascinating. Well, you probably know, obviously I do some of the Sterling stuff with Tom's designs, but there are quite a number of people that don't quite make that transition to playing a longer sand wedge, but they just love playing something shorter with a heavier head. Hey, and whatever works. So
yes.
And then for my own personal set, I mean, all my wedges are the same length, and it was something Dave Honke talked about to me, and I have I've got 4 wedges that are all 37 and what is it about? Well, 37.2 inches if I'm being weird, but that's perfect. So, there's a lot of tweaking you can do. Well, we have kind of gotten really deep into this, and, I said we'd talk maybe a little bit about wedges, but I don't think we'll talk into depth. But what kind of things would you want golfers to think about in terms of wedges and some of the things you do with wedge designs? What are some of the unique aspects of that? Obviously, different types of bounce and things, but maybe there are 2 or 3 things about wedges that you want to talk about in terms of takeaways for golfers, because they're obviously important from a scoring standpoint.
Okay, wedges being your scoring instruments. Can't go on enough about fittings, but a lot more people get fit for irons and drivers than they do for wedges or putters. And they'll pick up a wedge, they find it in a shop or something and go, I really like that. It becomes more or less an impulse purchase. So the first aspect of looking at wedges is you really should be fit. Of what you mentioned in regards to bounce is extremely important, And but in addition to bounce, it's also sole shape or sole design.
Yeah.
Bounce by itself, whether an individual needs more or less, or they need relief toward the heel or also out towards the toe, that's one aspect that can be identified during a fitting, but you'll find that those bounce requirements change as the rest of the sole design changes. And that sole design could be a simple change of just width, going from a narrow one to a much wider one, or it could be variables such as the amount of camber that you have in the soles, again, both from front to rear and from heel to toe. And so that's with the irons, as mentioned earlier, there's so many different types of swings out there and so many different types of irons that you can try to satisfy those swings with. Wedges are quite the same way, but again, not enough people get fit to their wedges. And a wedge fitting is not the same as an iron fitting.
Yeah.
An iron fitting is a full swing. A wedge fitting is, you want to start within when I do a wedge fitting, I like to start about 45 yards from the green. And we start in the fairway, hitting pitch shots to the green, finding a sole design that is going to interact with that golfer's pitch shot, and find a design that also is going to be able to control the ball once it reaches the green. Then move into chips if they like the feel of that, and the sole is working for them. Then we see how well it works out of bunkers with whichever loft they're going to be using for their sand club. But the type of shots that's asked of a golfer to hit during a wedge fitting are entirely different from what you would find with an iron fitting or even a driver fitting.
Yeah, I think I'm like you that way too. I tend to want to see people hit, if they're not able to hit a good shot, a 30-yard or even less shot with the wedge, mm-hmm. They may be able to do pretty well with the longer ones, but they got to be able to hit those shots if they're going to score. And they have to be able to feel bulletproof with those shots, right?
Yeah, yeah. And with recreational golfers, I really don't see many that hit well above 58 degrees of loft. So I know 60-degree lob wedges have been popular for a long time, and some people like to go up to 64 or some of these really high lofted specialty wedges. But for the average golfer, 58 degrees of loft is about as high as I seek some consistency for hitting shots into a green.
Yeah.
And if you were to hit a 50-yard shot from the fairway with a 58 degree, and then you hit the same shot with a 60 degree, but you happen to hit it, impact one score line up higher, the amount of distance loss is incredible. And most consumers don't realize that when you've gone kind of over the edge as far as maximum loft that you can consistently hit well, you're really doing yourself a detriment. Too much loft can be a challenge.
I have a guy I'm working with. I have to tell you maybe offline about it, but he had a 72-degree wedge that he dabbled around with. It was a really interesting interesting little toy. He picked it up somewhere, but I wouldn't carry one. Yeah.
No, it can those 72. I've hit a 72-degree wedge, and it took recuperation to get my wedge play back after playing around with that thing. Just kind of throws your swing out of whack trying to see what you can do with it.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, another fantastic interview. I appreciate it. How about a little bit of final things related? I don't know if it's real easy to sum up, and I'm sure some of it is get fit, but, any other final takeaways about irons and wedges that you want to put in here at the end?
While we're talking about irons in particular today, and I know there's a lot of focus on the head, the shaft is such an important element. Again, my last 2 rounds of golf I played with a forged blade, and I've played lighter, softer shafts in there than what I had ever played with in a forged blade. And suddenly a forged blade was so easy to hit, and I got ball flight back that I thought I had lost over the years, and realized it was the equipment. If there's a club, an iron that you really like, and for some reason you seem unable to hit it, find enough different shaft varieties with that head, and you're going to eventually find something that is going to be a good marriage. Like you said, the head has to look good to you. And if you find an iron that you just absolutely love, but you don't hit it as well as something else, there are enough shaft options out there that you're eventually going to find a good combination that will allow you to play with that iron.
Yeah, shafts are so variable in terms of what the distribution of their, flex and performance. I mean, there's absolutely no way to even come close and say this S and that S. They may be more tip soft or the midsection different, and the whole range of things. So, yeah. Well, great way.
Another topic.
Yeah, huh? Yeah. There you go. Well, thanks for that again today, Jeff. I'm going to put links to your website and also to Equus. I hadn't heard about that. I think that will be an interesting thing for people to read, but really in-depth discussion today. Hang in for a minute afterwards, and thanks again.
My pleasure, Tommy.
www.gameimprovementgolf.com.
Well, Jeff, thanks for sharing your time with me again and for doing another great interview, this time about iron head design with a little bit of discussion on wedges. I have again put the link in the show notes to the Jeff Sheets Golf website and also to the Equus Golf iron design that Jeff discussed in the interview. Well, that's it for today. In 2 weeks, I'm definitely looking forward to sharing an interview I'm going to do this week, actually, with Sean Hutchinson, the inventor of the terrific ICOS motor learning training system. I talked with Jeff personally at the recent PGA show, and based on that discussion, I know you're definitely going to enjoy this one. See you in 2 weeks.
Game Improvement Golf, your source of information and inspiration to become an exceptional golfer now. www.gameimprovementgolf.com.